She was called many things in whispers, but in the shadows of America's growing drug epidemic, one name carried an almost mythical weight: Clara Devereux. To her clients, she was a savior, a supplier of relief and escape in powdered form. To her enemies, she was a ghost, a woman who built an empire from nothing and made millions off a substance most people couldn't even pronounce. But to the authorities, she was a target, an enigma that had slipped through their fingers too many times. Before we dive deeper into the tangled story of Clara Devereux, make sure you're subscribed to Dark Case Files, where we bring you the darkest stories that most people are too afraid to talk about. And hit the bell so you never miss when we drop new investigations. Now, let's begin. Clara was born in 1983 in a quiet coastal town in Maine, the kind of place where nothing much ever happened and where people knew each other's business before it even became public. Her father worked as a dockhand, unloading fish from the boats that came in before dawn. Her mother was a nurse, strict but caring, the type of woman who believed discipline was a form of love. But Clara wasn't like the other kids in town. While her peers dreamed of staying in Maine, marrying young, and working in the local mills, Clara dreamed of something bigger, something louder, something dangerous. She was brilliant, but in a manipulative way teachers would often remark that she seemed to read people, studying their weaknesses like puzzles she could put together or tear apart at will. By her teenage years, she had already been caught running small hustles, stealing prescription pads from her mother's nursing bag, forging signatures, and selling pills to classmates who had no idea that this girl, who wore secondhand clothes and carried a torn backpack, was quietly building a reputation as someone who could get you what you needed. The first turning point came at 17. Clara fell in with a group of older kids who ran small-time cons across the state. They weren't professionals. They were reckless, messy, and constantly at risk of getting caught. But Clara watched and learned. When one of the boys, a 20-year-old named Tyler, got arrested for boosting electronics, Clara saw her future flash before her. She wasn't going to waste her life rotting in some county jail. If she was going to play the game, she was going to play it smarter, cleaner, and with much higher stakes. By her 20s, Clara had moved to Boston. She enrolled in community college, studying chemistry not because she wanted a degree, but because she wanted to understand how drugs were made, altered, and disguised. It was there that she first encountered ketamine, not in a classroom, but at an underground party thrown by wealthy students. The drug was everywhere, a white powder being passed casually in baggies, treated like some exotic escape. Clara didn't use it. She never really did. But she noticed how much people were willing to pay for it, and more importantly, how little they knew about where it came from. She asked questions, not the kind a user asks, but the kind a businesswoman asks. Who supplies this? How much does it cost wholesale? How hard is it to move? She discovered quickly that ketamine was in a gray zone, popular in clubs, whispered about in medical circles, but not yet on the DEA's top list of substances to watch. That meant one thing to Clara: opportunity. The first shipments she dealt with were small. A few vials stolen from veterinary clinics, slipped to her through a friend who owed her a favor. She turned those vials into cash almost instantly, selling to students who treated the drug like a luxury. The margins were insane. Every dollar she spent turned into 5, then 10. And Clara, with her knack for organization and her ruthless attention to detail, realized she had found her path. By 2008, she wasn't just selling in Boston. She had couriers moving product into Providence, Hartford, even as far as New York City. She never touched the drugs herself, never made a hand-to-hand deal. She was the spider at the center of the web, pulling strings, taking cuts, and staying invisible. Her network grew, and so did her legend. Rumors spread of a mysterious woman who supplied half the East Coast, but never showed her face. To law enforcement, she didn't even exist. Her name never came up in the early reports. They were chasing shadows, street dealers, and small-time players while Clara sat comfortably in penthouse apartments, counting stacks of cash and planning her next move. But success has a way of making enemies. Within her organization, not everyone was loyal. Some resented taking orders from a woman, especially one who never dirtied her hands. Others thought she was greedy, skimming too much off the top. Clara knew betrayal was inevitable, so she planned for it. She rotated couriers constantly, never let anyone know more than one piece of the puzzle. And if someone stepped out of line, they disappeared from the network overnight. Some left quietly, others didn't. By 2011, Clara was earning millions. She had laundered her money into nightclubs, car dealerships, even a chain of yoga studios. On the surface, she looked like a successful entrepreneur. But beneath that mask, she was orchestrating one of the most sophisticated drug pipelines in the Northeast. The DEA finally started to notice. Not Clara, not yet, but the sudden surge in ketamine flooding cities that had barely seen it before. Reports trickled in of seizures at airports, abandoned stashes, overdoses in nightclubs. A task force was formed, small at first, led by a man named Agent Michael Grant, a veteran who had spent years chasing cartels in South America. Grant didn't know Clara's name, but he knew someone powerful was pulling the strings. For years, Clara stayed a step ahead. She used burner phones, encrypted apps, even communicated through coded emails sent through gaming forums. To the outside world, she was invisible, but invisibility has a price. Clara became paranoid. She trusted no one, not even the people closest to her. Her inner circle shrank to just 3 confidants. Adrian, her childhood friend turned right-hand man. Lila, a sharp-tongued accountant who laundered her money. And Marco, a former nightclub bouncer who served as her muscle. Each of them was loyal, or at least, that's what Clara believed. But cracks were beginning to form. Adrian had a gambling problem, debts that Clara had quietly covered more than once. Lila was under quiet investigation by the IRS, something she hadn't told Clara. And Marco, well, Marco had been approached by federal agents who dangled the promise of freedom in exchange for information. Clara didn't know it yet, but the empire she had built was rotting from the inside out. One night in 2013, Clara got a call that would change everything. A shipment had gone missing. $500,000 worth of product vanished without a trace. Her couriers swore they never saw it. The warehouse guard swore nothing unusual had happened. But Clara knew better. Someone inside had flipped. And as she sat in her penthouse, staring at the city lights through floor-to-ceiling windows, she realized the empire she had built was under threat. Not just from the DEA, but from betrayal closer than she could imagine. That was when the hunt truly began. The raid should have ended everything, but somehow Clara Devereux slipped through the cracks. As agents swarmed the warehouse, breaking open crates and snapping photographs of the surgical ketamine bottles stacked in pallets, Clara was already 2 cities away, driving a rented SUV under a false identity, her blonde wig tossed onto the passenger seat like a shed disguise. For weeks, investigators had built their case with precision, confident they would finally put her in handcuffs. Instead, what they found was the ghost of a woman who always seemed 2 steps ahead, and the discovery only deepened the mystery of how Clara had built an empire worth millions without ever drawing attention to herself until it was almost too late. But in the end, no empire, no matter how carefully hidden, can last forever, and Clara's unraveling would be just as spectacular as her rise. Authorities began dismantling her operation piece by piece, interviewing terrified couriers, flipping mid-level distributors, tracing money transfers routed through shell companies in the Caribbean. Every lead pointed back to her, but Clara herself was untouchable. It was as if she'd vanished, a woman who existed in rumor more than reality. Detectives whispered about her like a phantom. The press painted her as a criminal mastermind, and the DEA grew increasingly frustrated with the fact that every move they made seemed anticipated, as though she had someone feeding her information from inside. Meanwhile, Clara had gone into survival mode. Friends who once toasted champagne with her now crossed the street to avoid her. The same couriers who had once idolized her feared her wrath more than prison. Her inner circle began collapsing, and that collapse would expose cracks she could no longer plaster over. One of her closest associates, a man named Victor Hale, had been with her from the start, running supply chains and smoothing out problems before they became headlines. But the weight of federal indictments and the promise of leniency broke him in ways Clara hadn't anticipated. One night, in an unmarked office tucked inside a government building, Victor sat across from federal prosecutors and agreed to wear a wire. From that moment forward, every conversation, every coded phrase, every ounce of trust Clara still clung to was being siphoned away. She didn't know it yet, but the circle was closing, and for the first time, her paranoia wasn't misplaced. It was survival. Agents began trailing her movements with painstaking detail, waiting for the perfect moment. But Clara was slippery. One night, she would be spotted at a nightclub in Miami. The next day, a surveillance team would swear she was holed up in an upscale condo in Denver. She changed her hair constantly, swapped identities with the ease of someone changing coats, and left so little trace behind that seasoned investigators started to believe they weren't chasing a single person, but a network designed to mimic her. What they didn't understand, at least not yet, was that Clara had mastered one rule better than anyone. To survive in a world built on deception, you must become a ghost long before death comes for you. By the winter of her third year on the run, Clara had lost nearly everything. Her cars, her penthouse, her stacks of money hidden behind fake walls. But she still had her freedom, and that, to her, was worth more than all the millions. The DEA prepared one final operation, a sweeping dragnet that would rely on informants, phone taps, and surveillance units placed outside every address linked to her name. But Clara anticipated it. On the very night agents stormed what they believed was her safe house, they found nothing but an empty wine glass and a single note scrawled in red lipstick across a mirror. Too late. That was the last confirmed trace of Clara Devereux. After that night, she vanished, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions, broken lives, and an empire crumbling under federal seizure. Some say she fled overseas, living under a new identity in a country with no extradition laws. Others believe she never made it out of the United States, instead blending into the shadows of cities that would never think to look for her. A handful of conspiracy theorists argue that she cut a deal with federal authorities, trading secrets for immunity and protection. But the truth? The truth remains buried, locked away in classified files and whispered speculation. For the families destroyed by her empire, justice never came. For the agents who dedicated years to catching her, the case remains an open wound. And for Clara herself, if she's still alive, her story is a reminder of how power, greed, and deception can transform an ordinary woman into a legend that refuses to die. Because in the end, legends don't need graves. They live on in the fear, the silence, and the unanswered questions they leave behind. And so, the case of Clara Devereux, the so-called queen who built an empire on shadows and syringes, stands as one of the most haunting disappearances in modern crime history. Where she went, no one knows. Whether she is alive, no one can prove. But one fact remains. She played a game with the world's most powerful law enforcement agencies and walked away without chains. That alone makes her story unforgettable. And if you've stayed with us through this chilling journey, make sure you're subscribed to Dark Case Files, where every week we uncover stories that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about crime, justice, and the human heart. Because Clara's story might have ended here, but there are countless others waiting in the dark.